Yitzchak had identical features as his father. And that's why the Torah says Avraham Holed is Yitzchak. Nobody could deny that Yitzchak was the son of Avraham because his features were identical to his father. Because the Litzoni Ador was saying, the scoffers were saying that the child was not Avraham's child, it was from Avimelech. So to dispel this consideration totally, Avraham Holed is Yitzchak. So we explained that why was that important? And if the people would say that Avimelech was the father, Yitzchak had a purpose. He had to be the continuum of Avraham Avinu. If people would say that he's the son of Avimelech, the impact and the effect it would have on the world will not be the same effect. Here, to a degree, he's on his father's coattails. His father is the foundation, the founding of Klal Yisrael. Now he's the next level. He's advancing in another level. If Yitzchak would be seen or be understood not to be the son of Avraham, he's not even starting at ground zero. Therefore, this had to be dispelled. Beyond any doubt that Yitzchak is the son of Avraham, not the son of Avimelech, to be the continuum of his father. Because again, Avraham's whole objective, as we mentioned yesterday, if Yitzchak would have been slaughtered at the Akedah, there's no future to existence. Because the Chil Hashem, there's no one to counter the Chil Hashem. Yitzchak was going to be his successor to carry on his work to espouse monotheism. And that's what we mentioned about Laturim, that he had said the word domim, that Eliezer, when he was mispalel, when he prayed for the appropriate matriarch for Yitzchak, in the schus that shavach domim, doma me'apachet akedah. He like shed his blood because of the fear of the akedah. When he was going to the akedah to slaughter Yitzchak, it wasn't that he was losing a son. He had pachat. What was the pachat? To the point as if you were actually shedding his blood. Because his whole value is what? Is to disseminate monotheism, Kiddush Hashem. And if that can't be achieved, it's like his blood is being shed. So if Yitzchak looks like people consider him this the son of Avimelech, again, it's the same issue. There's no continuum. Therefore, HaKadosh Baruch Hu he commanded the Malach to form his face to look exactly like his father. Okay? So we understand it. The Medrash tells us that David HaMelech had a son, his name was Kilov. Kilov was David's son. One of David's wives' names was Abigail. Abigail was the wife of Novel. Novel was a bad man. When David was a fugitive with his men and they were starving to death, he sent a message to Novel to supply him with food, with bread and wine to be able to survive. Novel couldn't care less. And David already had the status of a king. And David gave the order, he's going to kill Novel. Abigail got wind of this, Novel's wife. Abigail was a very great woman. She was a tzaddikus. She immediately took bread and wine, and she traveled to David to discourage him. After 10 days, Novel died in the plague. It says David waited 3 months. He was attracted to her beauty and everything else. And after 3 months, he married her, and she became pregnant. And she gave birth to a son. And his name was Daniel, but they called him Kilov. What's it all about? What is a person, if a person marries a woman, a divorcee or a widow, he has to wait 3 months. It's called Havchana. because there's a chance that she's pregnant from the previous husband. So to be able to establish the parenthood of the child, you have to wait 3 months. He waited 3 months. But after she became pregnant, 3 months later, exactly what happened with Avraham Avinu, the late Sonny Ador, the scoffers of the generation were saying that it's not David's child, it's Novel's child. That's what they were saying. So what HaKadosh Baruch Hu do? He went and he had the Malach form Kilov's face exactly like David. He looked exactly like David HaMelech. Exactly. A spitting image. It couldn't be denied that Kilov, his real name was Daniel. But he was called Kilov. Why was he called Kilov? Kulov. He was totally his father. Nobody could deny that he was David's son. And the commentator said, why was his name Daniel? Daniel from the word Danani. Like we find by Leah, she said, Danani Elokim, Hashem judge me. Over here, Daniel, Hashem, he prayed to Hashem that he should judge him to give him a son, that the son should look exactly like the father. And the reason why it was called Kilov, Kulov, it cannot be denied that Daniel is totally his father. Okay, so now the question is this. By Avraham Avinu, as we explained, it's important that everybody should know that Yitzchak is the son of Avraham to be able to carry out his work. Shlomo Melech was the successor to his father. He was the king. Let's say people will say that Kilov or Daniel is the son of David. I mean, David knows the truth. Let the scoffers generation say what they want to say. What difference does it make? Unless you say, because Malchus was given over, as the Rambam says, there were 3 ksarim given to Klal Yisrael. Kesed Melucha was given to David and Lazaro. He's the eternal king of Klal Yisrael. So even though Kilov may not be the king, Daniel may not be the king, but his progeny, his children, are qualified to be the king. But if they question that maybe this is the son of Novel, you're putting a question on the pedigree of Malchus-based David. Therefore, it was Kulov. Hashem performed the miracle that nobody could deny that Daniel was the son of his father. Therefore, he's Kulov. He's totally his father. I mean, that's singular. That's the way you would understand it. That's why David was mispalel that his son should be without a question that Daniel is his son. And that's why he was called Kulov. Okay? Maybe. It would make similar, it has a semblance of, as we spoke about Yitzchak. Why it was important for people to know Yitzchak is the son of Avraham. But it was thinking, the Gemara says in Brachos, that David had a Rebbe, he was the son of Shaul, his name was Mephibosheth. Why was he called Mephibosheth? Because Mevayish Penei David Ba'alocha. Because David HaMelech, whenever he would give a psak, he would give a halachic ruling, he'd pass it before Mephibosheth, and he would say, is it correct or incorrect? And there were times he said it's incorrect. Although David was the king, he was willing to put himself in a position that he could be embarrassed. He was Mephibosheth. He was embarrassed from the word Bosheth means embarrassment. He's willing to embarrass himself for the sake of Torah to verify whether his psak was correct or not correct. So why was he called? So why did he merit a son? He merited a son for that reason, that he was willing to put himself in this compromised position for the sake of Torah, the truth of Torah. He merited a son by the name of Kilov. We're talking about the same child. Why? So the Gemara doesn't say because Kulov, from the word klima. He embarrassed Mephibosheth. He was greater than Mephibosheth, that Mephibosheth paled to him. So he became embarrassed from Mephibosheth, from Kilov. It was Mida connected me, as David was willing, for the sake of Torah, to put himself in a compromised position to be embarrassed. Hashem merited David with a son. The son was greater than Mephibosheth, that Mephibosheth was embarrassed from him. from the word kulov. Because of his father, he embarrassed Mephibosheth. Okay? So maybe for us to appreciate David, if they would say this child is the child of the novel, how can we appreciate who David was? David was willing to put himself in a compromised position, when he studied Torah, and he would pass everything before Mephibosheth, even to be embarrassed. Where do we see how Hashem rewards him? How could we appreciate David's truth of Torah, his truthfulness of Torah? He's married his son Kilov. Kulov, there's no question this is David's son because he looked like his father. But in addition, the Gemara says from the word klima, he embarrassed. He surpassed his Rebbe in Torah, that his Rebbe paled him, and therefore he was like almost like he blushed in his presence. So it's one of these two things, either to establish the pedigree of Malchus based David, because Kilov, although he wasn't the king, but his children were qualified to be kings. And if it's questionable, they'll question the pedigree of Malchus based David. Or this other thing, as we're saying now, is to appreciate who David was. His name was Daniel, but it's Kilov because Hashem wants to reveal who David was. That's what I was thinking. By Yitzchak ben Arboim Shona, Bekachto was Rivka bas Besuel Harami Pad Aram. Yitzchak was 40 years old when he took Rivka, the daughter of Besuel the Aramean, the Pad Aram, Achos Lovan Arami, the sister of Lovan the Arami, Lolisha, for a wife. So Rashi makes the calculation. Why was he 40 years old? When Avraham left Har Moriah after the Akedah, he was informed through Ruach HaKodesh that Rivka was born. Yitzchak was 37 years old at the time. Because that's the time that Sarah passed away. When he came back from the Akedah, he found out that his wife, Sarah, had passed away. Yitzchak at Akedah. Shemesa Sarah Lamed Zayin Shana. How was Yitzchak at the time of the Akedah? He was 37 years old. Why? She was 90 years old when Yitzchak was born. And she lived until the age of 127. So Yitzchak was 37 years old when his mother passed away. Rivka, and that moment, at the time of the Akedah, Rivka was born. He waited 3 years that she should be mature enough to be able to cohabit with her, 3 years old. And that's when he married her. Okay? That's why he was formed. Normally, when you trace a person's pedigree, you only speak about she's the daughter of his father. Here it speaks of the father, the brother, and the location. So we talk about more than just her pedigree. We have the previous parsha. Already was stated she's the Bas Besuel. We know that also. Pad Aram, that's where Eliezer went. That's where he negotiated a hand. El Hadid Shrocha. The Torah wants to reveal the praiseworthiness of Rivka. Shoisa Bas Rosha. She was the daughter of a Rosha, Besuel. Achos Rosha. She was the sister of a Rosha. Umekoma Anshei Resha. The people were evil. And yet, despite all this, it wasn't an environment which is conducive for spirituality. She did not learn from their ways. That's Nagdishvara. See something interesting here. Rabbi Chanan Wasserman, Zechat Tzaddik L'Vrocha, he has a work, it's called It's essays on Hashkafa. So he asks a question there. Aristotle, the Rambam writes about Aristotle that his level of genius was such that he was able to come upon certain concepts that only a Navi was able to come upon those concepts because Hashem revealed to him. That was his level of genius. And yet, Aristotle didn't believe in God, did not believe. And yet, a 12-year-old girl and a 13-year-old boy has an obligation to believe in Hashem. Here, the genius of geniuses denied Hashem's existence. So how does Hashem put such a weighty obligation on a 12-year-old girl and a 13-year-old boy that they have an obligation to believe? That's the question he asks. He explains it with an allegory. This person goes and he has paintings of the masters, Rembrandt, Van Gogh, all the, and he tells the person, in truth, it's not. But you know what happened? One night, I had a parchment or a canvas on my desk. I left vials of paint, different kinds of paints on my table. I left the window open. There was a storm was brewing. And when I came in the morning, I realized all these vials of paint were knocked over. And this is the masterpiece. And it's exactly Rembrandt, but it's not Rembrandt. So the person who he's talking to is an expert in art, and he says, impossible. The color, the layers, the development, everything, it's beyond genius. It's clear this is Rembrandt, or wherever the master may be. This cannot be just happenstance. Every detail was written and done and painted with a specific ability and expertise, one of a kind of genius. So what are you going to tell me? This is just happenstance. It happened by itself. It's random. So Rav Kalatsky writes, you look at this world, the level of genius, it borders on the infinite. To say this happened, the Big Bang theory, or it all evolved from a one-cell animal. That's how all this came about. Because if you analyze and look at the world, it's an impossibility. Impossible. So if you look at the world, as we say every day, the Ramak says this, we say, Ma Rabbo Masef Hashem Kulam Chochmeh Siso. If you look at the world, how magnificent Hashem's fingerprint is on every aspect of creation. Ma Rabbo Masef doesn't mean numerous. How profound are your creation? Kulam Chochmeh Siso. The Chochmeh Hashem is evident in every aspect of existence. You take a hair follicle and you put it on the microscope, if you understand science and everything else, the genius in a blade of grass, they can't even comprehend it. The galaxies, the terrestrial, the celestial, the balance of existence. It's a level of genius, it's impossible. It could have come about by itself. So therefore, a person who has no agenda, no conflict of interest, you look at the world, it's obvious. It's God's world. It's not that difficult. But what about a person who has a conflict of interest? He has certain desires. He has certain personal interests. I mean, recognizing the world as God's world, he cannot take advantage of his personal interests because it's contradictory to what he wants. So what does he do? He goes into a state of denial and he deludes himself. Aristotle, being the genius of geniuses at that level, in the most ingenious way, he was able to deny God's existence because he had to justify and had to somehow reconcile his desires with existence. So how do you reconcile? You can't reconcile it. The only way to do it is to go in a state of denial and through his unlimited genius to see it through a lens that that the world is not God's world. But a child that doesn't have that conflict of interest, you're able to see it clearly. You look at the canvas, it's clear. This is Rembrandt. This can't be anybody else that. Because the child doesn't have that conflict of interest of desire, what we call taiva. Aristotle had a taiva, which was, we can't even relate, Baruch Hashem, to what he was, Aristotle. As a human being, like Bilam HaRosha, committed bestiality. He was from the greatest prophets. He was the world statesman. And yet he was exposed to that. Look the way he behaved. We speak about Talmidei Avraham Avinu, Talmidei Bilam HaRosha in Pirkei Avos, pompous, unsatiable desire for material, to the point even to commit bestiality. So I was just thinking as I read her father, Lagid Shvachosel Shel Rivka, Avia Rosha, Bas Rosha, her brothers are Rosha, her community was showing. V'lolimdom Maseyim, hear this. She did not learn from their ways. So where did she learn from them? Who was her mentor? Who mentored Rivka? You know what the answer is? If she was Lomdom Maseyim, you look at the world, that's where she learned. Looking at the world itself, she saw the hand of Hashem. It's shvocha, it's a praiseworthy that she didn't learn from her father, brother, or the members of the community. Once you're not influenced, automatically you see it clearly. That's Lulom de Maseyah. Exactly what Rabbi Chanan is saying. That's why the 12-year-old child and the 13-year-old boy has an obligation to recognize and believe in God, although Aristotle did not. Chaim explains, the Gemara tells us about the Basra, based on the pasuk, it says, Aaron married Elisheva bas Aminodov achos Nachshon. The wife of Aaron was Elisheva bas Aminodov, the sister of Nachshon. What do we have to understand? What does there have to reveal to us who the brother was? To tell us when you marry a woman, you should be both bachim. You should see who the brothers are. Why? Because because the majority of children, they take on the characteristics of the brother of the wife. So because Nachshon and Aminodov was the prince of the Shem Yehuda, therefore Aaron had special children because they took on the characteristics of the family. So we got a problem. So if Rivka's brother is Lavan, we got a problem here. And therefore we attribute Esav. Esav is what? Outpaced Lavan. Lavan is Lavan Arami. He's a person who has guile and a charlatan, unequaled Esav. Lavan had a semblance of that. So really, Yitzchak really had a very great question here. With such a father, okay, the father is half a problem, but with a brother, you're putting at risk the future of Klal Yisrael, because the patriarch is going to take on those characteristics. We got a problem. It's going to undermine the future of Klal Yisrael. Despite that, he married her. So Rav Chaim HaKadosh explains, because she was the most qualified in the world. There was nobody in the world who was as qualified as Rivka. And therefore he had to take the chance. He had no choice. And especially to go with Chazal, that it was predestined, because Avraham was informed that she will be his wife. Whatever's meant to be, it's going to be. So Esav was Lavan. Yaakov was not Lavan. But he took on the characteristics of Lavan. That's why the Torah is revealing that despite having such a brother, despite that he married her, because there was nobody else who was qualified to marry Yitzchak to be the future matriarch. And yet Yitzchak Hashem lenochach ishto. Yitzchak prayed to Hashem opposite his wife, Ki Akori, because she was barren. The Yoseh lo Hashem responded to him, V'ata Rivka ishto, and Rivka became pregnant. So what is the expression of Yetar? Chazal tells the 10 expressions of Tefillah. Yetar is one of the strongest expressions. The Gemara says a sukkah, an atar is like a pitchfork. What do you use a pitchfork for? You take something and you turn the things upside down. The Tefillah was powerful. Hirbo v'hiftzir b'Tefillah. the SLO, the Spatze, the Spayes, the Spatalo. Through Yitzchak's urging, Hashem responded. In abundance. Okay. What does it mean? He prayed opposite his wife. Each one is another corner, praying for the same thing. What is this all about? He's praying in his corner, she's praying in the opposite corner. What about if he prayed on the first floor, she prayed on the second floor? He went to the basement to pray, and she prayed at home. What's this? One opposite the other. Just a simple understanding. That's a v'yoselo, v'lo. Hashem responded to his tefillah, not to hers. She'dom tefillas, tzadik ben tzadik, l'fil tzadik ben rosha. You cannot compare the tefillah of a tzaddik, the son of a tzaddik, to the tefillah of a tzaddik, the child of a rasha. She was the daughter of Besuel. The fichach lo v'lo lo. Does this have to do with her worthiness? Nothing to do with it. Two different things. We speak about there's a person, then you have the pedigree. The person can be very special, but if the pedigree is not quite there, he's not as special as the person who has that pedigree. Yitzchak had the pedigree. He was a tzaddik ben tzaddik. As a result of that, therefore, he had greater clout with Hashem. She, as much as her share in the world to come could have been just as great. But in terms of clout with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, she's a tzaddik bas rosha. Therefore, her clout is not the same.
Rabbi, I thought that that a person who's a tzaddik from Russia has more clout because it's almost like how do they become a tzaddik? They had a much more difficult time to become a tzaddik.
It's two separate. That's what I'm bringing out here. Two separate things. In terms of your own worthiness, you may have a greater share in the world to come because you're a tzaddik ben Russia. That's your share in the world to come. But in terms of your standing, what's your standing? It's two different things. Standing is the pedigree. Pedigree. It's a different pedigree. A person's royalty, a person's a commoner. Because your royalty, you have a different standing. You have different entries. You have right of entry, which the other person is a commoner, doesn't have that right of entry. Yitzchak was royalty. Why was he royalty? Because he was tzaddik ben tzaddik. Has nothing to do with him personally. He's tzaddik, okay? So she's tzaddikis. But in terms of her clout, her status, his status was greater. Had nothing to do with him. It's just because what his pedigree was. But what's this? Zulu was she was in one corner, he was in another corner. Excited, when a person says a mishaber, for a person prays for a person for a full shlema, you're supposed to mention the person's name. But the Gemara says, how do we know when you pray for a person for refuah, you don't have to mention his name? Because when Moshe Rabbeinu prayed for Miriam, when she became a leprous, she said, Kel no refuah no lo. He didn't mention her name. So when you see from here, when you pray for a person, you don't have to mention their name. But that halach is only true if it's in the presence of the person. If a person's in the hospital visiting a sick person, and you want to pray for that person, since that person is there, you don't have to mention their name. If you're elsewhere, to connect the tefillah to that person, you have to mention the person's name. There's a different level of connection.
Good morning, Rabbi. Good morning, Rabbi. It's Howard. Could we address the idea of a broken heart we've seen many, many times that when a person prays with a broken heart, it goes directly to Hashem. A woman without children is praying with a broken heart. So the broken heart versus the royalty. That's what I guess the question is.
Yeah. Howard, right now we're talking about not the broken. We're talking about why did they have to pray opposite her? That's the question we're dealing with now. Okay? Howard,
Okay.
you had a question.
Okay.
We're not talking about that question.
Okay.
First it said Hashem responded to him, not to her. So we're talking, despite her broken heart, Hashem responded to him. Okay? So you see, broken heart plays no role over here. Okay? So over here, the question is, why did they have to be in the presence of one another? So I'm saying being in the presence, it has a total different effect, as I'm showing from there. But besides that, we find that when Yosef brought Ephraim and Menashe to receive the blessing from Yaakov, what did he do? He took them on his lap. First, he hugged them, he kissed them, he embraced them. And then afterwards, Yosef takes them away and puts one to the right, one to the left. And then he gives the bracha. What's all this kissing and hugging and showing this affection? What is that all about? What is that all about? So if you look in the Sifarna over there, a human being is still an emotional person. You're emotional, you have emotion. The more you connect to the person, the bracha takes on a different level. So Yaakov wanted to feel the love for his grandchildren and the love for Yosef, and as a result of that, only then the bracha had to be predicated on that feeling. His feelings had to be activated, so when he gives the bracha, it should be a different level of bracha, because he's connected to them. So when you pray for a person, if you're praying for your wife, and she's in the other corner, even though she's 100 feet away from you, but she's not within your proximity. It's not the same. It's the connection. When you're connected to that person, you pray differently. Chazal tell us, we find that all the matriarchs were barren. Sarah was barren. Rivka was barren. Rachel and Leah were barren. Why? Why were they all barren? So the Chazal tell us because HaKadosh Baruch Hu misaveh b'tfilos and shel tzadikim. Because Hashem desires the tefillah of tzadikim to pray, and because if they're barren, they're going to pray differently than if they're not barren. Although they'll pray, but the question is, we're talking about the Avos HaKadoshim. We're talking about the matriarchs, the patriarchs. They're going to pray in either case. The answer is, if you have no child, and you understand the value of having that child, where everything hinges on that, you could be a malach, but you're still a human being, you pray differently. And because HaKadosh Baruch Hu misaveh tfilos shel tzadikim, Hashem desires the tefillah of tzadikim, therefore he denied that they were barren. Physically, it was not possible. They needed a miracle. That's the reason why they were all barren. Because HaKadosh Baruch Hu misaveh tfilos shel tzadikim. So you see, when you have it in the gut, when you experience it as a human being, the tefillah is a different tefillah. When the person, as I said, when Yaakov, before he blessed Avraham and Menashe, he had to arouse his feelings, his love for his grandchildren, and as a result of that, the bracha was a different bracha. And then he gave the bracha, Yisim Chalakim Avraham and Menashe, and whatever else he said there. Therefore, it's Zel Nocher Zeh. Who was Pal Bezov Zeh, and he was Pal Bezov Zeh. Each one was in their own corner. That's what the Torah is revealing it. That the more physical, the more visual it is, the more you're touched by it, it's a different level of tefillah.